Welcome to the Develop Yourself podcast, where we teach you everything you need to land your first job as a software developer by learning to develop yourself, your skills, your network, and more. I'm Brian, your host. When you're learning to code, the amount of information out there on what to study or how to become a software developer is overwhelming. There are podcasts like mine, videos, courses, people on YouTube, every social media outlet telling you that they have the way to get from zero to software engineer. Now, a lot of these ways work. Here's the not so fun fact. Being a software developer is difficult, just like anything that is worthwhile. If you want to lose 100 pounds and get a six-pack, that's going to be difficult. People make a lot of money trying to sell you on a way to do things that tells you, hey, that's not going to be hard at all. I got this secret. You can eat whatever you want and do whatever you want, and you're just going to magically drop the weight. If you just do this secret thing that nobody has figured out yet. You only eat between, 2 a.m. and 5 a.m. and boom, you're going to lose the weight. Or don't eat bread and you'll lose the weight. Same thing goes for software engineering nowadays. I see people saying, here's the thing you got to learn. Learn cloud engineering or learn cybersecurity, and that's going to be the ticket to do it. I want to go over a strategy that I know works, and it works for software engineering or really anything. You can replace software developer with architect, with pattern maker, with designer. This is called the reverse engineering strategy. Basically, you look at the goal state of where you want to be, and you reverse engineer your way back to where you currently are. So you look at a person that's in the position that you want to be in, or you basically think, okay, what are the things that a person that's in this position already has, and how do I work backwards from there? So what do I need to know in order to get there? I do this a lot on the phone calls I do with people that call up and want to talk about Parsity or their own journey into software development. I think, let's reverse engineer. And I talk mostly about the thing they need to be able to build. So we're going to talk about what you should be able to build at the end of any good program, course, self-study that will make you actually hireable as a software developer. Because you could be spending your time collecting tutorials, courses, which lead you down all sorts of rabbit holes, which lead to more tutorials and courses. And unfortunately, I've met so many developers who are basically in the same place after years from learning using this method called the learning hamster wheel of death, trademarked. This scenario is too common. Purchase a tutorial, get introduced to a new concept that they don't understand. Then they start thinking, do I need to know this? Someone says Python or cybersecurity or cloud or Kubernetes or some other buzzword. And they think, I need to know this too. Let me purchase another tutorial. Hamster wheel ensues. Now they are on a path which leads to just nothing but tutorials. I met a person who I was speaking to years ago, and they were telling me they were learning Python and JavaScript and React and cloud and all these things. And I thought, that's way too much. I caught up with them years later or recently. They were still learning, nonstop learning. I remember working at a boot camp, and I remember meeting one of the guys that used to work in the lobby or something like that. And he was on this nonstop path of learning. He was just learning all these technologies, which really didn't make any sense. Because if you're not a software developer, you might think, oh, well, maybe they do this or that. You don't really have any clue about what's actually needed on the job. So you end up learning these insane amounts of tools and technologies, which nobody really wants to hire you for. If you're a React developer who also knows Kubernetes, who also knows Python and also knows Rust and also knows C# and PHP, first of all, nobody's going to really take you seriously because they're going to look at all those things and think, yeah, right, there's no way you know that stuff. Two, you just can't be very good at any of those things, so you become a Swiss Army knife developer. Basically, you're kind of good at a bunch of things, but you're not really good at one or two things, which is mostly what companies want to hire for. So here's how you can reverse engineer, simplify the path towards software developer step by step. Step one, like we just spoke about, identify the goal state. You wouldn't start a long journey without knowing the destination, right? You wouldn't make a trip across the United States or across some sea without knowing where are you going. The problem is you've likely been told your destination is a job. It's not totally inaccurate, but your real goal is to become a person who has the potential to be hired. And there's a difference between those things. Getting a job is an act. becoming the person who has the potential to be hired is a whole different transformation that you're going to have to make, because who you are now versus who you need to be hireable is a path in itself. So who gets hired? Who actually gets the jobs out there? And no, I'm not going to talk about this insane amount of fear mongering that is going on regarding layoffs or no one can get hired. Listen, I did an interview with an overemployed boot camp grad, meaning he has more than one job. I meet too many people that are getting hired, getting different roles, climbing up the engineering ladder, graduating boot camps, going on to work. This whole idea that it's like impossible is, one, silly, and two, way overblown. It is not easy. It's never been easy. And this might be one of the more difficult times to get that first job, but it is not at all impossible. People are getting hired. So who is? Who is actually getting hired? Software engineers who can build and deploy safe, secure, and scalable applications. And if you're thinking that's it, well, yeah, that's it. It's simple, but it's far from easy. So let's explore the only project you need to build. At a high level, you're going to need to be able to build a project that satisfies the following requirements. It needs to be publicly available at a dedicated URL. So mine might be madebybrian.com or whatever, right? It needs to have a backend that has some sort of authentication, meaning a user needs to log in with a password. Ideally, it's something that is not stored on your database. Maybe you're using something like Okta, some way for a user to log in and get information that is only relevant to them. It needs to have a database in order to persist data, meaning the data doesn't just go away when they go off the app. It is stored somewhere in the cloud. I'll have an episode on that later, meaning it's stored on a server that you don't physically have available at your house. It's stored on a server like on Amazon Web Services or Google Cloud or Azure or pick one, right? It needs to have a responsive front end, meaning the UI, the user interface, the thing that people see on the site looks good on both a mobile and a desktop. If you go to the news site, if you go to LA Times or New York Times or any major news outlet, and you look on their mobile site versus their desktop site, it's the same information, same content, but the visual display is different. It looks good on both. Yours needs to also look good on both, and ideally everything in between, meaning tablets, other things like that. And if you don't know how to write media queries or do responsive front-end design, it's not that hard to do. Look up media queries, and that should be basically enough to get you started. This project also needs to leverage continuous deployment, meaning when you update the code and you push to your GitHub repository, and if you don't know how to use GitHub or Git repositories or anything like that, check out one of the older episodes we have that is a step-by-step guide on doing Git. This should get you dangerous enough, but there are a ton of tutorials out there on using Git. But yes, it should leverage continuous deployment. You update the code on your machine, you push to the repository in the cloud, and then it updates the site so the changes you just made are now live on the site. Lastly, it needs to have some unit tests. Unit tests, I've also done an episode on this, by the way, and you can look all sorts of information that's out there on unit tests. In fact, I have quite a lot of information on unit tests because I've become pretty dang good at them. I've even made some courses on them and shared them at several companies where I've worked. It's been a really fun thing for me to learn. Unit tests ensure that the code that you wrote works as expected. It is basically code which tests other code. So that's it. I didn't mention any technology specifically here. You can really mix and match whatever tech you'd like. Here's what I would strongly suggest. And by the way, this is what we teach at Parsity. React and Next.js for the front end. React.js is the standard. It is the safest thing to learn right now. Next.js is becoming the standard, and it will be, mark my words, because React.js now partners with Next, and they even say, hey, this is the official framework you should be using. So learning Next.js, incredibly important. Now, in 2 years from now, it's going to be expected. I can safely bet that that's going to just be an expectation that when you get on the job market, you just know how to use Next.js. And most boot camps are not teaching it. It's one of the main reasons I chose to incorporate it into the curriculum, because I know that it's a thing you're going to need to know. You should be learning Mongo or SQL for a database. Mongo is really, really popular. It is the second most popular according to Stack Overflow. SQL, first most popular. Pick one. If you're on the coasts or working for startups, you're probably going to use Mongo. And if you're not, you're probably going to use SQL. The underlying technology is different, but the idea is not so different. Basically, it's a database living in the cloud where you store data and it lives there. It doesn't blow away when you go off the website. You should be using Node and Express for the backend, AWS or render.com for the backend deployment, meaning when you have code that's written in Node or Express, where do you actually have it hosted? So when a person goes to your public URL, it needs to be on some sort of a service that hosts it. So AWS or render.com or Google Cloud Platform or DigitalOcean, pick one. Use Vercel.com for the front end deployment. Backend and front end are different. Backend is where you have your services that will talk to your databases. The front end is the part where you're most likely comfortable with, where you have like your HTML, CSS, JavaScript, React, the stuff that a user looks at. And that should be on Vercel.com if you're using Next.js, which you should be. Really easy, like too easy to deploy something. You could do it like within 10 minutes of listening to this, you go on Vercel.com, you could totally figure out how to deploy something out to the cloud and have it hosted up there really, really simply. Finally, use Git and GitHub for version control and continuous deployment. There's a thing called GitHub Actions. I'm actually doing some curriculum on that right now. So GitHub has a tool called GitHub Actions, which is free, which will listen and be ready for when you push code to a branch, and it will just deploy to wherever you need it to get deployed to if you want. Tons of stuff out there on learning that too. Last step, fill in the blanks. This project could be anything you want. It could be a to-do app. The hard part is really just learning enough to get to the next stage. For example, in order to use React, you need some JavaScript knowledge. Before you can deploy your app, it needs to be stored in the cloud. And before it can be stored in the cloud, you need to understand Git and GitHub. To make the app responsive, you need to know some HTML and CSS. With the goal in mind, if you have this goal of, okay, this secure, scalable web app using some of the technologies I just described, now you can avoid these rabbit holes and keep laser focused on this project and also what it's going to take to actually be a hireable, a developer that can be taken seriously. When you go to an interview, they're going to inevitably ask you, tell me about a project you've been working on, and you can tell them about this particular project. Now at Parsity, we lay out the technical and the career path for you because the technical piece is just one piece of this puzzle. The career path is honestly more difficult and nebulous, meaning it's not so clear. Everybody has a different way that they're going to get hired. We see some patterns and trends, which make sense, but they change quick. In fact, your career path may change more than the technical path over the years. We see the tech market shifting and changing a lot. We see the technology has essentially stayed kind of the same. There's a reason why you can go to a boot camp that might have had their curriculum like 8 years ago. And for the most part, it's the same. They might have had to add React or something. But a lot of things like AWS or Git and GitHub or Node and Express or JavaScript in general hasn't changed so dramatically that you need to do that. But getting a job has changed dramatically. Now, that's the part I think that Parsity is uniquely suited to help you with. We partner not only with one of the top 5% career people on Upwork, Megan, who I'm going to do an interview with soon, but we also are partnering with Digital Crush, with David Roberts, a person who had on here recently, just to make sure we can make a super strong job guarantee for people that do the course, do the work, and actually do what our career people say and get them hired. Because what good is learning how to code if you actually don't get hired? So with that being said, this is the last week you can apply for Parsity and take advantage of our $500 enrollment discount and get our job guarantee. So if you're on the fence about joining Parsity, this would be a great time to do a little bit of research, see why we're so highly rated, see some of the success stories we've had. And if you really want to know a little bit more, grab some time in my calendar, but do it quick because there's only one more day to get that enrollment discount. I hope to see you there. And as always, I hope this is helpful. See you around. That'll do it for today's episode of the Develop Yourself podcast. To learn more about becoming a software engineer with us, then check out Parsity.io. If you're not quite ready for that, then jump into our Dev30.xyz program, which is 30 days of working on your mindset, habits, and JavaScript skills. Totally worth it. See you next week.